But one thing I was thinking about too, that the idea of the callback, which every comedian knows to use, but also is a tool of a fiction writer too. You know, and there's one of my favorite descriptions is in this book is the I can track it down here. Oh, the hangover, which is this is the hangover. Maybe the hangover would never leave, just fade from immediate detection, hide like a deep cover hitman, some human killbot who works the graveyard shift at American Smelter, takes his family to mass every Sunday until the moment the baddies flip his switch. Then my hangover, activated by further alcoholic consumption, would return, step out of the shadows in surgical galoshes, press the muzzle of its silencer and gorge Ruger to my skull. The Milo sanction would be complete. And the truth of that is how a hangover works. Every hangover is a return of my last hangover. And so in the same way, I think that the language has to work. It has to work in that observational way too, that we hope great fiction does, where we recognize in large and small ways. And then I was so excited toward the end of the book to find that sleeper fiend, my hangover, had given notice at the smelting plant, deposited his family under the floorboards of his garden shed. He stood over me now in Claudia and Francine's guest room, his eyes fish dead behind the barrel of his skull-mulching gun. I was so excited that the sleeper cell hangover was back. It just seemed, besides being funny, it just seemed like that great bit of writing in which, thematically and even something small like that can make its way back in the book.
Thanks. I really, you mentioned stand-up comics and callback. I've always been really interested in stand-up comedy.
Did you ever do it?
I never did it, and I really admire those who do. But I've watched a lot. I have friends who do it professionally, and I would really love to pump them about their craft. And there are things that I think I've learned from them. Sort of, obviously when the craft of writing fiction does include the idea of you put elements into motion, you want them to kind of return.
Sure.
But sort of the power of smaller kinds of returns too. The callback.
Right.
That's sort of ancillary. The ancillary callback is always I think a really powerful thing. And there's this great book by Wallace Markfield many, many years ago called "You Could Live If They Let You," about kind of Lenny Bruce style stand-up comic, and it's narrated by the academic who's trying to write a dissertation on him, get a handle on him, and has, really can't, and it just doesn't. And I sometimes feel that way when I'm thinking about stand-up comedy, but it still really intrigues me, especially the comics who do more of the long-form thing where they're telling a story that kind of gains momentum with the accrual of these elements, rather than just joke.
Yeah. It just seems terrifying to me, though. And I still get a sort of, when we were in Edinburgh, they had the Fringe Festival, which is apparently every comic in Europe packed into this one town. And I was so afraid to go to a show where there might only be 4 people, because then we just all share this humiliation together, whether it's funny or not. And there was this comic doing this long bit about how, that old joke about how when airplanes crash, the black box survives. Why don't they make the airplane out of the black box material? And anyway, he was telling this updated version of that about the movie Star Wars, and how when they're stuck in that trash compactor, they're firing lasers and they're bouncing off the walls, And he said, why didn't they just make the Death Star into that trash compactor? And I laughed really hard, and I could see him sort of like, thank you. It was literally a 12-minute setup for just me to laugh. It does seem terrifying. So,
well, I had one opportunity. I was with a friend and he was about to go on. We couldn't get this kind of transition right. And he asked me to sort of help him, and I wrote some funny thing that got him from one place to another. I can't even remember it, but I was sitting there as nervous as I've ever been, waiting to see how it would go off, and then he did, and he got a big laugh. And I swear that was more exhilarating than most of the things I've done in my life, which is no laughing comedy.
I don't know about you, but the other difficult thing for me is this is a novel about a guy who's losing his house, his lost his job, his wife is possibly having an affair with an old boyfriend, and you describe it, and people just go, and then you say, and it's funny, you know. And my next book really has the Donner Party in it, and it's funny too, you know. And I don't know how.
Funny stuff.
Yeah, it is funny stuff. Yeah. But I eat one lousy foot, they call you a cannibal. But I don't. I mean, I don't. Honestly, it's the thing that it's not the description of the book. It's not in that situation like you talk about that's necessarily funny. It is some other quality you're bringing to it.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's absolutely right, because I've had the same, you know, the same thing. Oh, it's about this guy who loses his job, who's
Wait a minute. We were cycling together.
Well, I remember reading this, and I just, you know, I was finishing it. And saw that your pep date was early. But, yeah, I mean, I tell people what the plot of the novel is, and they just either glaze over, look really depressed. And then you say, you know, but it's funny, and they think you're kind of creepy. And, but what it is for me, is that the situation is the spine of the thing, and then as all the, at least the great funny novels do, those are where you can hang your riffs and your digressions and the things that make up the richness and the texture of the work, that create, that really give you the characters, that give you the dynamics of not only the people but the world. And so you know, it's home base really is the story, this story of somebody. And I began wanting to write about somebody in economic duress, basically. That was all I had. And somebody once said to me, you know, it's good to start. Actually, a guy who now doesn't even believe in fiction, David Shields, told me once, very helpful. He said, you know, you might want to start with somebody that has his back to the wall. You know, that always struck me. You know, you don't have to sort of walk the person to the wall. Just start with the person at the wall. As a great teacher of mine, Gordon Lish, said, you know, start with the blowjob. And so I think that I like that. I just wanted to write about someone in a lot of trouble, and then everything else could shoot off the book. And so, but when people ask you what it's about, then you're just with that spine. And yeah, I've had, you know, an entire book club come to me and say, we're thinking of doing your book. And, you know, what's it about? And I have to say, well, it's, you know, I do the depressing spiel, and then I say, but it's funny, and then I just get these kind of these looks, and then they say, well, maybe you're still in the running. We'll think about it.
You know what I do is, after I give the spiel, I say, and they're vampires.
Right.
It's always picking. And then when afterward I say, well, it's subtextual. I missed it.
I'm going to try that.
There's so many, I mean, the level of observation in that book, and the way some of them, you know, there'll be these stunning observations that just come at the tail of a clause where I think, where did that come from? And is that I know we both are shy of process questions, but do you feel, I imagine you with a journal full of these incredibly rich observations that then work their way into fiction. Does it work that way?
No.
It doesn't at all?
No. I don't have a journal.
Wow.
And I mean...
Well, that's me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's you. Let's talk about your journal. Yeah, you can read from it. I have, well, I used to have this kind of ridiculous, prideful idea that, you know, if it's important, I'll remember it. Of course, I'm getting older, I can't remember anything, so, you know, I'm sure I'm losing a lot of stuff, but I kind of feel that once I'm writing, all the things that are maybe have been bubbling around will come out at the right time, or will happen in revision, because, you know, and this is something I'd like to ask you about, you know, how important revision is for you in terms of the comic element in your work. How much of it comes out initially and how much of it gets shaped?
Wow. Again, not being able to separate, you know, what is comic and what isn't.
Right.
The one thing I do know is you've had those reviews where it's laugh out loud, or people write you emails. laughed out loud as if they're, they're sort of stunned to have done that. And there were a couple times writing this where I laughed out loud, but I've never laughed during the revision process. I may come up with something wry and interesting, but I've never, that does seem to me, that the first chapter of this book was a kind of first draft. It was a long poem. When I get stuck writing other things, I write some of the worst poetry ever. And it starts out maybe with a little bit of meter and sometimes even rhyme, and then it just becomes prose, randomly broken out of lines. But it was about a 12-page poem about a guy who goes into 7-Eleven, and it was everything that ended up being funny about it came in the first draft. And I think that tends to be the way. I think it's sharpening and refining language, and hopefully I make something sharper and funnier. But the impulse within the language and within the situation, I think, is more first draft. Do you think it's more in the revision?
Well, the sharpening.
As you were writing?
No, maybe giggle a little bit.
Yeah.
It truly felt. Yeah, but that's what plagues me while I'm doing revision. That little moment, that phrase isn't right yet, and that and maybe to the exclusion of other things that I should be worried about. I worry about that, and so yeah, I think a lot of this stuff gets fine-tuned in revision. Like I kind of know generally this is a comedy writing term, what the area is.
And are you a draft writer then? Do you finish a draft usually and then?
Well, I really can't. I have to be so solid about what's behind me that that first draft takes forever, and then I do more drafts. It's
knowing something is awful.